Hi, LA Progressive friends and readers. Dick and Sharon back here again from LA Progressive. And today we're here with Nora Lester Murad, whom we've known for years, who is who has written an article called "On Teach Truth Day of Action: The Movement to Teach Truth Includes Palestine Too." First, I think people would be interested in your unique background, a Jewish woman who lived in Palestine, raised kids there, knows the issues in Palestine and Israel deep, deep, deep in your heart. Now you're back in Massachusetts, but you're still very much involved with that community. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your history?
Well, sure. I grew up in the LA area, in Pasadena, actually, and my parents, who you know very well, were super involved with many social justice issues, including desegregation. And I suppose growing up in a household that was really committed to anti-racism, to social justice, to addressing needs of undocumented people and also unhoused people, just made me really always interested in understanding what's happening in the world and what my role is in it, as a citizen of the world and as a US person and taxpayer. And then what can I do about that when I discover things that are concerning and problematic, and I have some role to play? What is my role? I guess that kind of upbringing led me to become interested in what was happening in Palestine. And I first went actually as a sophomore in college, and then went back to study in Cairo for a year and then in Jerusalem for a year with a focus on Israel and Palestine. And it was between those 2 years that I met my husband, who's a Palestinian Muslim. And subsequently, after some years in the US, we did go back and raise our three daughters in the West Bank.
Wow, that's so interesting. So you met a Palestinian Muslim while you were studying in college, and you married him, and you guys have raised a family partly, well, I guess 100% of the time when you had the children, you were there in the Middle East. I want to ask you, you said that your parents were activists and that your mom and dad were very active in working against segregation. And I just want to make that clear for people who don't understand. You know, in 1954, we had the Brown v. Board of Education landmark Supreme Court case that established that we cannot have separate but equal, that when it is separate, it is not equal ever. And it is not in the interest of the United States as a whole to have segregated societies. But many people think that, okay, so then 1954, that resulted in the eradication of segregation in the United States. What was your experience?
I went to a segregated kindergarten. And then we moved from a almost completely white neighborhood to a predominantly black neighborhood, just kind of on the line between a white neighborhood and black neighborhood. And my school was a predominantly black school. Um, and yeah, I mean, racial issues were hot and real as they continue to be. Inequities by race and other social characteristics. No, the fight's not won.
And it doesn't even seem to really be addressed. Solutions don't seem to be addressed in the public school system. It's almost as if this way of living has been normalized and expected, and seems like the people in the United States expect it to be that way. And the way that they think is projected onto other countries, which I want to get into what's happening with the Palestinians in Gaza and Israel.
I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, I became more involved with schools after I published a young adult novel, Ida in the Middle, which is about a Palestinian American girl, and it won some awards, and that led me to be invited into schools to speak with students and teachers. And that's when I learned more about how difficult it is for teachers to bring Palestine into the classroom, and also how uh, decentralized and localized education issues are. So when you're talking about what's happening in schools, I think it is so different in different places, in different states, in different districts, in different cities. And it can vary by so many different factors, including literally who the principal or the superintendent is.
So your article is about that. Is how is the Middle East history and current affairs taught? I think in a simple way you make the argument the idea isn't to teach the Zionist Israel point of view or the Palestinian point of view, but to teach truth, as the movement is called. So give us a sense of how is the Middle East taught in schools today?
Right. So I think that there's a kind of predominant, probably it's a white thing, idea that there's two sides to everything and that we should always be in the middle of those two sides. Which when you think about it is a little bit crazy because as things move to the right, it skews what the middle is. It skews everything to the right. And I just really try to ask, educational policymakers, why do you want to include everyone when one side is exclusive, right? We need to move forward with principles of equity and justice and not be thrown off that mission by the idea of including everyone. So, so I think over time, Palestinians have been more and more erased. But when there is discussion about Palestine or Palestinian-Israeli relations, it does often fall into this two sides narrative. And what that does is by bringing Palestine into the classroom, it legitimizes the Zionist point of view because they're two sides. So now they're two equal sides, they're two legitimate sides. And I think that's really problematic. And we don't teach that way about other issues, which are settled issues. We don't say, oh, what's the pro-slavery argument? What's the anti-slavery argument? Let's look at both sides. We don't do that. Now, I think we did.
We
We
did.
did. Right,
Mhm.
we did do that, but now that is settled. And teaching about Palestine is still in that place. And what we need to do is move it to obviously even Black history is still very much under attack, but we still want to move it to a place where at least anti-racist educators understand that we don't need to like let every narrative be equal, like let's look at who says there's climate change and who says there's not climate change. No, there's facts. So we need
Right.
to bring the facts in and understand the narrative people make from those facts, but not to erase facts with narratives, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there's actually a sizable population in the United States that believes that the earth is flat. They call themselves the flat earthers. I don't think that in our science classes we should give them equal billing.
Right, exactly. I mean, here in my town, and we have some really serious issues of what I consider to be very racist and predatory Zionists who really go after in very aggressive ways through doxing or even in personal and sometimes violent ways against people who are protesting against genocide. And so what we don't want to do is to say, that's a side, and you guys are a side. And I am the mayor, or I'm the library, or I'm the superintendent. I need to be here for everybody. No, no, no. If you've got the KKK knocking on your door, you don't say, oh, let me include you because you're part of the community. We really have to keep a principled point of view, and that there are just some things we don't debate. We don't have to debate them. We should not debate them.
But it seems currently that the sides that are opposing a principled point of view around what's going on in Gaza and Palestine, the sides that are against that principled point of view are winning the day. I mean, they're using their force in universities, in charging people, arresting people. I think we need to fight against that.
Absolutely. I mean, the convergence of Zionists, and the Zionist impact in education is really converging with the right wing and Trump right wing in a really very frightening way. And it's frightening not only for Palestinians and anti-war people who are being abducted or fired or wrongly accused of anti-Semitism, having their names smeared, causing mental health problems and relational problems. All of that is super, super bad. And what we also have to point out is how dangerous it is for Jews, because when Trump says, "Oh, I'm taking this research money for healthcare, I'm going to take that away for Jews," that's like classic scapegoating. That is like the most classic anti-Semitism that you can have, and it is dangerous because people who don't know Jews and who may also have been exposed to anti-Semitic tropes may be very inclined to say, "Why are they doing that for Jews? I don't have a job. I can't get health care. I this and I that." All of their grievances are so legitimate and valid. And then here they see, US foreign and domestic policy being skewed for Jews. That's not a good thing for Jews either. I'm just saying this is so clearly an issue that we should all be on the same page about. Fascism is bad. Authoritarianism is bad. Racism is bad. And using those racial politics to divide communities that actually have a shared interest, that is bad. And we should not, fall prey to that.
Yeah, so I've been doing some reading and research about what this ultimately results in, this way of teaching where everything is reductionist oriented, that people don't understand the complexities associated with different kinds of people living together. And I found a I found a piece that said a society with poorly informed citizens who struggle to recognize propaganda. They struggle to recognize particular narratives that are written to manipulate them. That in and of itself threatens democracy. And I think we kind of see that. We're sitting here speaking to you in Los Angeles. We're just about 3 or 4 miles away from what we're seeing all over the news, where we've got the National Guard, the Marines have been brought in, because people are so easily manipulated into believing that we had some kind of insurrection-like activities going on in Los Angeles that necessitated the President of the United States sending in the National Guard. They sent them into like our Home Depot. We were just driving past the Home Depot. There was no insurrection, but because people are so uninformed. So I want you to talk to us about what you learned when you went. You were born and raised in Southern California, and then you went and you actually lived. What was your day-to-day life like when you were in Palestine?
So my engagement with Palestine spans 40 years. So it's been different in different periods of time. When I first went, I couldn't even determine what part was the West Bank and what part was Israel. There was no wall, there were no checkpoints. Not only could you move back and forth, but people did move back and forth. Palestinian restaurants and shops in the West Bank were frequented by Israelis on a daily basis. So that was an experience. And then over time, there was the first intifada. During the first intifada, which was in the late 80s, I was running delegations, taking groups from Cambridge, Massachusetts to the West Bank as part of the Cambridge Ramallah El Beira Sister City campaign. And that was an effort to kind of take foreign policy into our own hands on the municipal level, because we could not rely on US foreign policy to be legitimate. At that time, the PLO was illegal. There was no representation. It was really bad. So we took it into our own hands. We established this sister city relationship, people to people, unofficial. And then I was taking people during the first Intifada. That was fascinating, and I think an important part of my overall understanding of Palestinian history and also the potential, because I saw amazing things during the first Intifada. Israel closed the schools and the teachers opened their homes and kids came to their homes. You couldn't move to get to a doctor, to get to a clinic or a hospital. The doctors opened up their homes and treated people in their own neighborhoods. Everybody went to their own local area. There was so much nonviolent, not just mutual aid. It was even more than that. Um, I felt like they were enacting the possibilities of real liberation under the most difficult of circumstances. Of course, things got worse and a lot of people got hurt. And history goes forward, and then we go way, way, way back, which is obviously where we are now. Um, Most recently, they did put up a wall. It is in some places a fence, in some places a ditch, but most of the places you would go to, it is a 8-meter high wall. Um, and this wall is not on the armistice line, the green line, it's called, between West Bank and Israel. Israel built it inside the West Bank, effectively annexing large amounts of territory uh, that would have been negotiated, and splitting farmers from their fields, splitting kids from their schools, splitting professionals from their workplaces, just really devastating kind of destruction of daily life and living. And that is what it was like when we lived there for 13 years, raising our kids, going through checkpoints on a daily basis, not just long lines, but unpredictable amounts of time of moving, going through checkpoints, sometimes having a machine gun pointed at your head while you are waiting, um, sometimes being turned back, sometimes being tear gassed at the checkpoints. I actually have been shot at the checkpoints.
Whoa.
So, I mean, they weren't shooting at me, but they were shooting, and I was there. Uh, it's funny because as I talk about it, maybe it sounds extreme or shocking to people, but in so many ways, I felt much, much safer there than I do here in the United States, because I could leave my kid in a park there, and if they got lost, they would ask anybody, "Excuse me, Auntie, I got lost." And they would say, "What's your father's name?" And they would tell them the father's name, and they would get them home. There was that kind of community that comes actually from being oppressed,
Yeah,
where people feel like we're all in it together.
yes.
Um, Whereas, I wouldn't have left my kid here in Massachusetts in a park, or in a playground by themselves. That would have been crazy.
That's so interesting. I mean, just in hearing you say that, also coming from an oppressed community, I know what you mean by there is some degree of safety among the community.
Yeah.
It brings you closer together. Um, are there parallels? Do you see parallels between what you've described in Palestine, where when the Intifada was first was set up and people opened up their homes, teachers who couldn't teach in schools opened up their homes, or doctors who couldn't practice medicine in hospitals opened up their homes. So it sounds like the government or public policy, they were imposing their wishes against the population who did not want this. Do you see parallels like that here in the United States?
That's a hard question. Um,
I'm actually thinking about what's happening earshot away from where we're sitting.
right. I mean, maybe I'm not sure. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the parallels. Clearly, I think what is true in all situations is that people who are oppressed will resist. Right. So the idea that Israel becomes safer by oppressing Palestinians, by denying Palestinian rights, is completely uh, twisted. It's just a twisted logic. Just like in the worst cases of structural inequality, like slavery, which is just a data point that we can relate to, slave owners were in fact at risk because they created a situation that people will, by their humanity and by a moral requirement, push against. It's an unstable system.
Yeah.
So I think that's what we're seeing in LA is that people don't accept for very long, certainly, or this level of brutal authoritarianism and oppression. They don't do that here, they don't do that there. So for me, the answer is just so obvious in both places, which is just equality and respect for people's rights. Um, but in both places, perhaps in different ways, the inequality is justified by a very long dehumanization. And that's where we go back to schools. We go back to how dehumanization, let's talk about Palestinians for a minute. Dehumanization of Palestinians begins at a very, very early age. I did with four Palestinian teachers, we did a study of children's books that involve Palestine or Palestinians. We got a very big data set. We chose about 56 of them to analyze deeply, and we ended up with four categories of erasure. And there's like the traditional erasure where let's say the old city of Jerusalem is presented in a children's book, and there are white pilgrims there, and there's no Palestinians. So it's a Palestinian area, but Palestinians are literally erased from it. There's that kind of erasure, but there's other kinds of erasure where, for example, Palestinians in diversity books are represented as a minority of Israel, as a cultural, linguistic, and religious minority, but not as a national group in its own right or as a group with a history that precedes its relationship to Israel. So that's another kind of erasure that even when Palestinians are there, the way that they're represented leads to dehumanization. And that's just two of many things that we found and ended up, I published several articles about it in academic journals about, first of all, the erasure of Palestinians from children's books, and then the other side of that. What if you're a teacher? If you want to not erase Palestinians, right? What would you be looking for in books that are anti-colonial and anti-racist, and develop those criteria as well. And that piggybacked a little bit, or to a great extent, off of the phenomenal work of Debbie Reese, who analyzes children's books for Indigenous representation. So that was a really great project, an eye-opener for me, because erasure is hard to see because it's not there.
Yeah.
You have to ask questions like, why why is this person why is the Palestinian in the book never speak?
Mhm.
Why are they there but they never speak?
Right.
Or why, this is one of my favorite ones, why do they put the Dome of the Rock, which is a very famous mosque, on the cover of books above the word Israel, where the Dome of the Rock is in East Jerusalem, which was illegally annexed by Israel and not recognized by anybody until President Trump moved the US embassy to Jerusalem, and subsequently other right-wing governments recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, but most didn't because it's against international law. And yet here you have the Dome of the Rock on the cover of the ABC book with the word Israel. And that's hard to see if you don't know what you're looking for. And for me, the reason why that matters is that right now we have in positions of power in the US government in the military, in the economic sphere, in the political sphere. We have people who've gone through these same schools where Palestinians were either completely erased or dehumanized. And that enables them to see what's happening in Gaza right now and not realize, basically, this is a Holocaust. This is a Holocaust, what is happening literally right now as we speak, where millions of human beings are being systematically denied food, water, and medical care, and at the same time being bombed.
Right.
How can, how does the whole world not just rise up and say, we should stop the world from turning and stop this? Of course, it's not the only atrocity going on, and I'm not saying that it is. There are some things about this which are particularly egregious, including that Israel has kind of broken the whole international rule-based order, you know? They kind of broke the UN. They broke a lot of things, and there has to be accountability for that.
Yeah, there will be accountability, I believe. But I'm with you. I don't understand how the whole world can watch and see what's happening, particularly to children. No medication. I heard about a little girl who was a double amputee, and the amputation was done without any medication, no, nothing. And so many children are starving, and we sit by. And the United States continues to provide arms to Israel.
So,
It's egregious.
so recently, five, I believe, European nations took some action against Israel. Maybe they wrote them a stern letter to stop. But is there any possibility that anything good could come out of the horror that we see, the tens of thousands of Palestinians murdered, oftentimes with American bombs? The reports we get out of Gaza is the place is blown to rubble. Every school, every hospital, every university in particular is destroyed. Is there any possibility of a decent, humane result?
I mean, I can't say no. I'd have to just like roll over and give up. There has to be a resolution. It's actually the simplest resolution in the world. It's not complex, it's not complicated, it's not unrealistic. It's just equality, It's just so simple and so basic. Um, and I just, I don't know, you asked such a hard question. One reason why that's difficult is we're not just talking about people, individual people who've been poorly educated or, who read bad books. We're talking about organizations that are well resourced with systematic influence that is destructive. In schools, the predominant, the worst one I feel and that has the most impact is the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL. The ADL is kind of like the APAC of schools, where they are just constantly putting the pressure, both carrot and stick pressure on schools to normalize unconditional and uncritical support for Israel. So they're not just normalizing Israel as a state, they're normalizing the whole idea that criticizing it is anti-Semitic. Um, and they're uh, surveilling and policing and enacting punishment on teachers, schools, and districts who veer from their politics. They're doing that both through reputational slander, which can be just saying that teacher is anti-Semitic. They don't have to prove it. They don't have to put up any any evidence. They say it, and the harm has been caused to that person's reputation, their mental health, their career. And consequently, They're students. We really have to look at how this impacts students. In Philadelphia schools, a Black Muslim teacher was falsely accused of anti-Semitism, was removed from the classroom. What does that tell to her Black Muslim students? What message is that sending about the district's interest in educating and supporting them in their totality, including their identity? And it's not kind of by chance that a lot of the teachers that are falsely accused are teachers of color. I think the ADL and their allied organizations can get away with that much easier. But it's not only this reputational slander. That's a very labor-intensive way to destroy people. They also do lawfare. Lawfare is weaponizing, for example, civil rights law and claiming through complaints that go up to the Office of Civil Rights for investigation, claiming that certain activity, for example, protest activity or uh, opposition to Israel's actions, or even teaching Palestinian history, is makes an unsafe or hostile environment for Jewish students. Obviously, they're confusing Jewish students and Zionist students because not all Jews are Zionists and not all Zionists are Jews. There are far more Christian Zionists in this country than there are Jews in the entire world. So Zionism as a political ideology is now being protected by civil rights law when they claim that Zionists are made unsafe by criticism of Israel. And that leads to kind of this like crazy situation where I, as a US citizen, um, I can criticize my own country. And in fact, the right to criticize my own country is what makes this a democracy or a potential democracy. Like that's just basic. If you can't criticize your government, uh, you know, it's over, right? Uh, so we can criticize the US government. I can criticize the government of Iran. I can criticize Canada. I can criticize China and say it shouldn't exist. It has no right to exist. I can say lots of things about lots of countries, but I can't criticize Israel because that then is contorted into a religious hate crime. What a world.
Yeah.
What a world.
Well, it's a remarkably effective public relations campaign that has equated any complaint about Israel's government or Zionism and calling that anti-Semitism when that's such a hot button issue. Nobody wants to be called an anti-Semite. So people are scared away from even talking about what Israel's doing.
Right. Fear is such a big part of their strategy. You know, the way the Anti-Defamation League, every year they put out these statistics, anti-Semitism has gone up 300%, 500%, 2000%. It just goes up and up and up. Jonathan Greenblatt says it's a five-alarm fire, right? This has so many consequences, one of which is the Jews become scared. They look at themselves and they go, gosh, I feel okay. I feel okay, but they're telling me I'm not. I must be not seeing how bad it really is. There must be danger out there that I'm unaware of. And they become scared. That's bad because we don't make smart decisions when we're scared. Um, but the Anti-Defamation League needs to have a lot of scared Jews in order to continue to present itself as a protector of Jews, as a civil rights organization of sorts, and leveraging that credibility of that undeserved reputation to, in fact, enact anti-Palestinian racism on schools and on Palestinians and manufacturing consent for genocide, manufacturing consent for genocide by silencing any critical thinking and critical speech when it comes to Israel. And that's one reason why I work with Drop the ADL from Schools campaign, because we need to get the ADL out of schools where and let teachers teach critical thinking. Let students be exposed to facts and narratives, come to their own positions without fear and without silencing.
Well, Nora, we thank you so much for the work
Yeah.
that you do. We thank you for this Teach Truth campaign and for emphasizing the importance of getting the ADL out of our educational system. Nora Lester Murad, it's just been such a pleasure talking to you today. And I wish it was under different circumstances. I really do.
Me too. And I hope that your folks your listeners will look at the Teach Truth campaign, which is not my campaign. It belongs to Teaching for Change as an education project, and it's an important and long effort that everyone should be supporting. But also efforts that I do work on, like Drop the ADL from Schools. We just need support, people coming reasonably, come reasonably with an open mind, and let's just ask if the way we're approaching this in schools is in fact constructive.
Wonderful conversation. We'll have to do it again here in the near future. Thanks so much, Nora.
Thank you so much.
So long.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.